So today we're going to be looking at basic router configuration. Our objective is to understand how routers work. So we're introduced to this in chapter number 8. We look at the network layer. The network layer, the key device that performs the function of the network layer is a router because it's responsible for moving traffic from one network to another. So today we're going to be looking at how to set up the initial router settings, how to configure interfaces, how to configure a default gateway. So for this chapter, we are going to have the basics. So as explained earlier, the Cisco iOS is the Cisco Internet Operating System. It is the same for a router, it is same for a switch, and all Cisco devices. So Cisco devices are typically all running the same operating system, but each operating system is going to be doing a different function. Similar to how you have Windows for servers and Windows for your PCs, Windows for your phone, and so on and so forth. So the first thing we're going to look at today is how to set up the router's initial configuration steps. We'll be looking at how to set up a device name. We'll be looking at how to set up a secret. We'll be looking at how to set up a line console password. And when you're setting up line console password, we are mostly protecting the user exec mode. We'll be setting up the virtual terminal passwords, that is enabling remote access and securing it using terminal SSH. We'll be looking at encrypting all passwords and then also setting up legal notification messages we'll be setting up legal notifications that help people who access these devices, and also learning how to save all these configurations. So we're going to look at all this at once since we've done it before with the switches. So let's quickly get to it. So the first thing, of course, is open up your packet tracer. So once you've opened up your packet tracer, we are going to look at a sample router, and the router we'll be looking at here under networking devices, there's routers. We'll be looking at an 1841 router, and an 1841 router is the fourth router from the end. So I'll quickly zoom it here so that you can see what I'm doing. So as I explained earlier, there is the common way we access these devices when we are configuring for the first time. So typically we'll use a normal PC, and the special cable we use to access the router, begin configuring it, is a console cable, and it connects from the RS-232 port to the console port of the router. And once we have set up that cable connection with the console cable, we need what they call a terminal emulation software. So you simply open up the PC and go to desktop. And once you go to the desktop, you simply click on the terminal and say OK. Now, once you open this up, it will open up the terminal emulation. So terminal is a terminal emulation software. It will quickly open and show you the command prompt. And sorry, it's further. It will open up the operating system. And once you open up the operating system, when it asks you to begin the initial configuration, you simply say no. And return, of course, means enter. And you will be in the router's settings. You will be now inside the iOS. The second way you can access the iOS is a shortcut that I'll disable in your tests. You simply click on the router itself and click on CLI, which stands for the command line interface, and it will give you the same prompt, same exact prompt like what you saw when I opened up the PC. So now let's quickly proceed. So the first thing we looked at here is how to set the host name. Now to set a host name, I'm now in user exec mode. I have to go to the privileged and global configuration mode. To do this, I use the enable command to go to privileged, and then the configure terminal command. So now I'm in global configuration mode. How you know I'm there is on my prompt, you see the device name and config in brackets. So first thing, set host name. The command that sets the host name is called host name, followed by the name that you want to give it. I'll call mine ICT -YCI. So once I've given the host name, to change from router to the name that I've given. The next thing is protect the privileged mode with an enable secret. And to set the enable secret, I use the command enable secret followed by the secret, the password that I want to use. So I'll use a simple one like Cisco. So I advise you guys not to use Cisco because I'm setting it for just learning purposes, but should always set secure and good passwords. How do I test this? I exit out of global to privileged and I exit out of privileged to use exec. So in the moment I say enable, it will ask me for the secret. So always please remember you don't forget the secrets. So the next thing I am going to look at, which is our next objective, is I'll look at how to secure the user exec mode using the line console password. So I now go back to my router and now I am setting up and protecting the user exec mode. So still I go to configure terminal because all those settings are done in the global configuration mode, and I will say line console 0. Now of course we have one console port on the router. So remember, as I discussed earlier, begin counting from 0. So if I'm setting up a password for the first console port, I say line console 0. So now I'm in the settings of a console port. So I set a password. My password is going to be class. So lastly, I use a special command called login. Now login ensures that the moment a console cable has been placed into the port is able to detect the cable. Without login, even if you set a password, the password won't be, there will be no prompt for the password because login enables the port to sense a cable and prompt the user for the password. So it's very important that you add the command login. So let's test. So to test, I exit out of global to privileged. So here at this stage, I was exiting out of the console port settings. It took me to global. And when I exit out of global, I go to privileged. When I exit out of privileged, I go to the user exec. So when I press enter, it's going to ask me for a password. And the password it's asking me for is the console password, which is class. So now when I'm in the user exec mode and I want to go to privileged, I say enable, and it will ask me for the secret, which is Cisco. So those are two different passwords doing two different functions. The next thing I want to look at here is, let's go back to our notes. So the next thing is I'll discuss remote access and telnet at another later stage. But now we're going to look at how to encrypt all plain text passwords and also how to set a legal notification. So now that we've set all the passwords, all these passwords are in plain text. How do I verify that? So you can verify that passwords are in plain text by viewing your running configurations. So I can say show my running configurations. So when I show my running configuration, it shows me the host name that I set. The secret, because I use the secret command, it's already encrypted. However, because I used password for setting the line console password, it is in plain text and I can read it. So a special command exists that enables encryption of all passwords that were set with the password command. It is the service password encryption. And this can be found in the global configuration mode. And the way I get into the global configuration mode is set the simple command configure terminal, and then I run the service password encryption. So service password encryption will encrypt all passwords that have been set with the command password. So if I exit and show my running configuration, you see that secret, of course, was encrypted before, but now my password has moved from seeing the actual password to an encrypted password. Okay. And lastly, I want to talk about the banners with legal notification. These banner messages are very important because they help warn people before they access your device that they are not authorized to access the device. So it helps you set messages that are viewed before a person actually logs into your device. It helps warn people of any legal implications. Okay, so this is also done in global configuration mode. So I use the command banner message of the day. I hope you remember this when we're setting up the switches. Banner message of the day. Then we can have a start of message delimiter. I've chosen a greater than sign, so I can make it also decorative. Put some stars, and then I can put some capitals. Unauthorized access is prohibited. And I also make it a bit decorative. I put some little stars. So then I have to put that delimiter again because it marks the beginning and the end of the message. So all these stars are there for decorative purposes, as I'll show you. So my percentage sign is here and percentage sign is there. Just for decorative purposes, I have the stars and the capitals. So I can now exit and we look at how the message looks like. Exit out of privilege. Now you see this is how it looks like. Yeah. So always be careful what you use as your delimiting character so that the delimiting character doesn't appear anywhere in the message, because the iOS reads that character as the first character that is specified and then looks for that character at the very end. So it looks for it at the beginning and the end and simply prints for you what's in the middle. So that's how you end up with something that looks like this. Okay, something that looks professional. So we proceed. So lastly, how to save your configuration. So if you notice here on our device, um, enable Cisco. So if you look at your device, we have two types of configuration. We have what they call the startup configuration and the running configuration. The startup configuration is what is loaded when a router starts up or a switch starts up or any Cisco device starts up for the first time. To view that information that is loaded, you run the command show startup configuration. So this here means that there is no startup configuration. Means that if right now power went off and this router comes back on, it will be with no configurations at all because there is no startup configuration at present. Startup configuration is a configuration that is loaded the moment your device powers on for the first time. However, whenever you're making these configuration changes on your device, they all go to the current running configuration. So if you see here, if I show the running configuration, it shows everything that's just done. But all this running configuration is in the RAM, meaning that if power goes off, all this is lost. So how do you make this permanent? By making this running configuration and copying it to the setup configuration. How is that done? You say copy running configuration, startup configuration. So you press enter twice, you see the OK, and the configuration is set. So now that means that if you will move from a situation whereby you run a command, let me show you here. You run a command, show startup config, and you got a message, no configuration is present when you run show startup config, to something that looks like this. Now you see this configuration present when you run show startup config, meaning that even if this router switched on and off, the configurations will always be there. Okay, so how do we test that? I can go to physical here. I zoom in for you a bit. I switch off my router. I switch it on again. And once it finishes loading, you'll notice that my configurations are still there. So the command that helps us copy the running configuration, startup configuration, enable Cisco copy running configuration, startup configuration. Just press enter and you have that. You can exit. If you can switch this on and off, you see that my configurations will not have gone away. So I press enter, everything is intact. So always make sure that you copy run to start to ensure that whatever changes you make on a device are permanent. So let's quickly continue. So we've gone through all these. I won't explain further. Copy running to start. We've gone through all those settings. Now we need to learn how to configure interfaces. So a router will have many interfaces. Now we need to understand how interfaces are activated, how interfaces are configured, and how interfaces are configured and how they can be assigned addresses, how they can be described, things like that. So we're going to quickly look at that in a minute. Okay, so let's look at this. So for this, we are going to have an additional router added to the topology. Just a minute. Close this. And now I'll add an additional router in the topology so that now we look at a situation whereby we have more than one router. I will get two switches, 960 here, 960 here, and our goal is to look at some communication. So I'll add, let's say my PC is here, PC 0. I have my PC that, another PC here, and another PC also here. So I have my switches. So I'll connect my PCs to the switch. Please remember that this cable is for management, not for network connection. So this cable is for accessing the operating system. This other cable here is for network access. Please remember that you cannot communicate with a console cable. So I plug that here. Oh, sorry, wrong cable. I get this. Plug it there. Get this here. Plug it there. Get this here. Plug it there. Now I am going to use fast Ethernet 0/0 on both these devices. I'll also use fast Ethernet 0/0. So let it go to any port of the PC. So I'm not particular. So use any port that you can. Okay. So we're not being particular here. So whichever port you can use, it's fine. It doesn't matter. Okay. So we continue. Then I am going to introduce us on interfaces. Now you see these routers, they have serial ports. If you look at the device over here, physical, it has some empty base. So to link a router to a router, for this case, we're going to be introduced to what they call the serial ports. The serial ports emulate wide area network connections. So because of that, it helps us to have and mimic a wide area connection. So to have these serial ports, these serial connections that mimic wide area network connections, we have to have serial ports installed into the routers. So the step one is switch off the router and get a module called a weak 1T. You drag it, place it there. It can only be put there when the router is switched off. And then for this empty slot, you can put a cover. Because like any router, it's important that you don't leave the place open because dust can go there. That's for you to know in the real world. So I do this for the second one also. I do this for the second one. Just a minute. I do this for the second router. So just 1 minute here. Okay. So I have my second router now. Also, I have switched it off. I've added a weak 1T and also put a cover and switched it on. Now, once I have put those two modules, I now need to use a special cable called a serial DCE. This one with the clock. This one here. I connect it there and it goes to my other router. Now, I need to be able to configure these interfaces for these devices. So I'm doing this just to make my network less cluttered. Okay. So we have something that looks like that. Just like that. Okay. We try to make it a bit more organized and more looking better. Okay, so we have our topology there. Okay. Now, the next objective we have here is how to configure interfaces. Now, to do the interfaces that you have on your device, the first thing you need to do here is open up the command line interface of the device. And we are going to learn a basic command called show IP interface brief. So as I explained earlier, we just simply say no here. So I simply open up my device. So I'll open up my router. Okay. So let me open up my router over here. Okay. So remember, always say no. This is the second router if you have it configured at all. And then I'll go to privilege exec mode by first using the enable command, and then I run a command called show IP interface brief. So it shows me what interfaces I have. So on this router, I have a serial 0/0. I have a fast Ethernet 0/0 and a fast Ethernet 0/1. So if I look at these devices also and I pass my cursor over, it shows that to me. Yeah. So the serial is what I've just added, the serial 0/0/0/1/0 and also 0/0/0/1/0. But at the very bottom here, I am using fast Ethernet 0/0 to connect to the PC. Okay, on port 22. Just maybe let me lower this because it's not displaying as we want. So okay, fine. So maybe like this. So if I pass my cursor here, you see at the top it's fast Ethernet 0/0, at the bottom is 22. If I try to do the same here, if I pass my cursor there, 0/0 and 17 at the bottom. So let's look at how to configure interfaces. So let's begin with the first Ethernet 0/0, which is down here. Okay, so we're going to look at giving it an IP address, and the IP we want to give is going to be based on the network. So what I'll do here is that I'll create a network colored for us here. Okay, and then I'll draw my outline. So this side is going to be a different network. Sorry, anxiety. Just a minute, let me delete this thing here. So let me draw it again. Okay, so this side is going to be a network that there, and another network on this other side, I'll make it yellow. So okay, then set it like that. Okay, so the network on this side here, reduce in size a bit. The network on this side here is going to be the this the 192.168.3.0 network. This is going to be the 192.168.5.0 network. Remember, routers link multiple networks together, so this also has to be a different network. So what do we have here? The network down here for these PCs is going to be that network, because every router interface connects to a different network. Network down here is going to be 3.0. So this point-to-point link between these two is going to be part of that network. So let's quickly get to how to configure interfaces. Let's quickly get to how to configure interfaces and how to describe the interfaces. So the command that you use to set up interfaces is normally very simple. The first thing is you need to have an understanding of the interfaces themselves and how they are named. And how you know that is by using the show IP interface brief command, which I just run here. Show IP interface brief. It lists down the interfaces and the types of interfaces that we have. So the next step is begin configuring. So you go to the global configuration mode. So let's begin with this network here, the 5.0, because I'm on router number 1, which is here. So let's begin our configuration. So on router number 1, I'll say interface. I'll say interface, fast Ethernet 0/0. Remember, that's where we put the cable. IP address 192.168.5.1. That is the first IP of that subnet. 5.0. And I can put a description, connection to router 1 LAN. Okay, and then lastly I say no shutdown to turn up the interface. Okay, so if I exit out of the interface mode, exit out of global, and show the running configuration, it will now show me that on fast Ethernet I've configured it, I've described its purpose, and I've given it an IP address. Okay, so I can do the same for the second router. So remember, the second router, we had already configured it, we had put names, passwords, and things like that. So let's go on. So that password class, then this was Cisco. So now I say configure terminal, interface, fast Ethernet 0/0. So remember, this interface specifically is for this other network. Okay. Is for this other network, the 3.0 network. So let's go quickly configure. So I say IP address 192.168.3.1 and subnet mask 255.0. I description, connection to router 1 LAN, router 0 LAN, and I say no shut. This automatically sets up the interface. Everything becomes green. Okay. So whenever you make changes to a router, please remember to copy and save the settings. You say copy, run, start config, press enter, and the settings are saved. So same thing, you do it also on the other router. Okay, since that one we didn't configure much, I say copy, running configuration, startup configuration, and everything is saved. So even if power goes off in this scenario, the device will be able to keep the settings because now they are part of the startup configuration that loads with. So that is how you assign interfaces IP addresses. Setting a description. So it's normally a good practice to add descriptions because they help you remember and keep information about what the interface is for. Okay, so those are the commands that you will use to set IP addresses, description, and always remember it's a good practice to describe. So I've just explained how we assign IP addresses to an interface, and I won't dwell on that again. So now I want to explain how you configure the serial interfaces. So far we just looked at assignment of addresses on the fast Ethernet interfaces. We're now going to look at how you assign addresses on the serial interfaces. So go back to our packet tracer. So as you see, we have router number 1 and router number 2. So the network that links the two interfaces together has to be a separate and different network because routers are always connected to multiple networks. So let's begin with router number 1. So remember the network they're supposed to be part of is network number 2. So this is 3 because this is a network with its interface. Same. So this is the 2 network. So let's get quickly to configure this. So this side we're going to give it 2.1 and the other side 2.2. So as explained earlier, you need to know the names of the interfaces. So you run the command show IP interfaces brief. So it shows me all the interfaces that I have on my router number 0. So already, of course, we've assigned fast Ethernet. Now we need to assign the serial. So to do this, of course, you go to global configuration mode, terminal, and then after that, you will simply say interface serial. It has to match the name that you saw earlier when you run the show IP interface brief because that's the name of the interface. Serial 0/1/0. And also it gives an IP address 2.168.2.1. Remember, it's from the 2 network. Okay, it is from the 2 network. The interface is of the 2 network. So please be cognizant of that. So we continue. So I now assign a subnet mask 255.255.255.0. Description serial connection to router 1. So you may put a description, may not put a description, but it's important and good practice. Say no shutdown. Now, the difference between serials and fast Ethernet is that for a serial interface, the moment you say no shutdown, it won't come up quickly like a fast Ethernet interface. And the reason is because both serials have to be up before both of them comes down. So let's get to router number 1. So you won't get a notification telling the interface is up until the other side is also up. So both of them have to be up for them to run. So if you notice the first time here, router number 0, it is still no message for interface coming up. Okay, so let's look at router number 1. Router number 1 is just not yet configured. Okay, so let's quickly look at router number 1. So the moment you configure router number 1, the assumption here is that it will quickly come up. So let's get through. So the other router number 0, we gave it 2.1. So let's give this one 2.2. Get terminal. So you say interface serial. So similar to this also, if I can exit a bit, you can show IP interface brief so that you know the name of the interfaces. Sorry, brief. So you know it's also called serial 0/1/0. So I say configure terminal and I say interface serial 0/1/0 and I say IP address 192.168.2.2 because the other side was 2.1, the other serial end, and 255.255.0, and I say description connection to router 0 because it's linked with the router on the other side, and I say no shutdown. Automatically everything goes up. So routers serial interfaces to go up, both sides have to be up. So effectively we have finished configuring the routers. So continue. So this is going to be a quick chapter. So now I can run the show IP interface brief command and it will show me that both my interfaces are now up. I can run that randomly on any of these routers. So you see before, first Ethernet was the only one that was up, serial was not yet assigned. So now I can say exit show IP interface brief. Now you see they are both now up. Okay, so that happens when they're up. So of course the first Ethernet 0/1 we never configured it because we not had the reason to. Let's quickly go back to our chapter. So we've already done this, so let's quickly run through. So these are the commands that you can use: show IP interfaces, show IP route. So we can look at this. So show IP interface brief, which I explained earlier, it displays all the status of the IP addresses and their current statuses. Show IP route will show you the routing table. So if I can quickly go to our packet tracer, show IP route, it is showing me the routing table, the network that is on serial and network that's on the fast Ethernet. Then I have show interfaces. This one shows you in-depth information to show things like statistics, to show you all that information, not only just addressing. I can show you here. Show interfaces. So you see here on fast Ethernet, it is showing you all these things, statistics, IPs, the duplex mode, and so on and so forth. Much more in depth. When you see such a screen, you can press space bar, read page by page, and escape, of course, to exit back to the prompt. So we continue. So I won't go into the verification. Show IP route, we've already looked at it. And of course, show IP interface, the statistics, I won't go through that. All this information like show IP interface will show you the statistics, how many packets you've transmitted, and so on and so forth, which I showed you earlier. So I will not dwell on it so much, which you see over here. And Now we're going to be looking at how to configure the default gateway. So a default gateway, as I explained earlier on, is that part of the interface of the router that belongs to your network. Now a default gateway is used, so let me look at a default gateway, sorry. So a default gateway is typically used to route information out of a network. So a default gateway is used when a host sends a packet to a device on a network. A default gateway address is generally the router interface address attached to the local network of the host. For these PCs to reach each other, that is the PCs on the different networks, you need to have a default gateway. The IP address of the host router must be on the same network. So the default gateway has to be configured an IP address that's on the same network as the devices. As we explained earlier on, if a PC is sending data to another PC on a different network than its own, it is going to be using the MAC address of the default gateway. And when the frame gets the default gateway, the router will de-encapsulate the frame to view the packet and then forward it out of the respective interface based on the contents of the routing table. Okay. How do you configure the default gateway of the PCs? So as you see in our topology here, we have PCs. Okay. The PCs haven't been configured yet. Now we have to assign PCs addresses corresponding to their respective networks. So I'll begin with PC number 0. Okay. So PC number 0, I assigned an IP address. Remember, the network to which PC number 0 belongs to is the 3 network. Okay. So I give you an IP 192.168.3. Remember, 1 was already given to the router. So I assign 192.168.3.1. So 3.1 is the default gateway, that is the IP address of the router that belongs to its own network. So I close that PC number, the second PC. So second PC, that is the PC number 2 on that same network. I also do the same. I assign default gateway, which is 192.168.3.1, and also 192.168.3.3. Remember, the first PC is 3.2, this is 3.3, but always the gateways are the same. Now, to enable communication, of course, as I explained, the PC has to have a default gateway. But whoever they're communicating to also has to have a default gateway because they won't know how to reply. So for that reason, these other PCs 2 and 3 have to open PC number 2 and also assign it an IP address similar to its own network, which is 192.168.5.2. And that's a subnet mask, and of course 5.1 is going to be a gateway. Okay, hope that makes sense. Why? Because the router's address is 5.1. So we go to the next PC here, PC number 3. Similarly, I give it an IP address. Remember, 5.1 is the gateway, and this one is going to be 5.3, and that is all. So you notice now, once you have done that, you can have communication across all the devices. And we'll do that by testing from this PC here. Go to the command prompt. Are we there? So once we're there, we first check the IP address, the command ipconfig. It is 3.2. Now let's try to ping 5.2. So the first thing I need to look at here is what have I done wrong? Okay. Oh yes, that's okay. That's fine. Fair enough. So of course, one of the big issues you have here is that you're trying to ping 5.2, but how do you get to 5.2? Now we're going to look at something called a static route. Like, how do you put a route? Because when you look in the routing table here, for this router here, open up here, and I run a special command called, let me first put in the password, which is class, and here it is enable. It's Cisco. Now, if I look at my router here, okay, and I run the command show IP route. When I run show IP route, I notice that in this router here, there is no network corresponding to that 5 network. Okay, but then 5 network is on the other router. So when I pinged, I got an error because the router doesn't know how to find 5 network. So for that reason, we're going to look at what they call a static route. Static route is something that we looked at in chapter number 8, except that we're now going to try to put it and configure it in the router. So we go to global configuration mode. We're on router number 0. Remember, on router number 0, the network is network 3. Okay, so we say network configure terminal, and we say that to connect router number 1, we need a static route. So I say IP route, IP route, okay, route. Now I put the destination address 192.168.5.0 destination network. We specify the destination subnet mask, and then which interface can we use to connect to them? That is serial, because the serial is the one that links to the next router. So I say interface. Sorry, I said I specify fast Ethernet. Sorry, serial 0/1/0. So here I have set a route that if any traffic comes and it's going to the 5 network, send it to the serial of the router. That's on router number 0. Yeah. So the reason why I've said that is because if I show IP route on my router, okay, my network that I've configured on my fast Ethernet is 3.0. But then 5 is somewhere else, so I have set something called a static route that sends all traffic that is coming for this network to my serial. And this serial is the one that links to the other router's serial. Okay, so then we go to router number 1 and do the same thing. So if I configure, if I show IP route here, this network knows about 5, but it doesn't know about 3. Remember, network 3 belongs to the other router. It belongs to the other router. Network 3 belongs to the other router. But now we're on the router on the right. So let's quickly configure. So now we say that for this router, configure terminal, I say IP route, I specify the destination 192.168.3.0, that network on their router, subject mask, also connect to serial 0/1/0, which is the serial. So it sends all the traffic out to the serial, which goes to the other router's serial and gets to the destination. So when I do that, and I now do my testing, remember previously I got an error here, remember? Now I try again. It means that now the router has a route that can help us to send the traffic to the destination. So the router receives the packet, checks the destination, looks at the routing table, and knows which interface to forward it out. Okay, so it means that all networks can now communicate with each other from both sides. So I can also test on this other end. And I say ping 192. Remember the IP address. This is a 51. So I ping 192.168.3.2. I have replies 3.3. I have replies. So that is how you set up default gateways. So, and that's how you set up default gateways. So then the last thing we need to look at here is, what if you want to be able to also access the switch remotely? The PCs can access each other. How do we set up remote access? So to set up remote access, of course, the first thing is you need to assign these switches IP addresses. Obviously, the switch on this end has to belong to the same network as 3. The switch on this end has to belong to the same network as 5. So how do you assign an IP address to a switch? Open up my switch, open up the command prompt of my switch, enable, configure terminal, and for switches specifically, when you're setting an IP address, you assign it to a special switch virtual interface called VLAN1. And I will simply say IP address 192.168.3.4. Remember, we assigned up to 3.3. And of course, I said no shutdown. That is for the switch on this other network on the left, that is the 3.0 network. So then I also assign this one on the 5 network. I simply say enable IP configure terminal, interface VLAN1 IP address 168.5.5.4.5.5.0 and no shutdown. And the two interfaces are up. So the last part is, how do you give the switch a default gateway? Give a switch a default gateway is different. You simply say IP default gateway and specify the gateway, same gateway as you gave the PCs. Remember, they're on the 5 network, and 5 is the router interface. That's how you assign the gateway for switch number 1. And then this other second switch on this other side, which is on the 3 network, simply use the command IP exit out of the interface, IP default gateway 192.168.3.1. That's it. So you notice that once you've configured those gateways, we can ping those switches from any PC. So for example, this PC over here, I can ping the switch on the other network. So I say ping 192.168.5.3.4. I should have a reply because that's a switch on the other different network. So if I don't, yeah, now I have a reply. Just a minute. Yeah, so that is how you set default gateways for the switches. Okay. So we continue with our chapter. So that's how you set a default gateway address. So here we have learned how to set up a router. We have learned how to set up the switches. We have learned how to set a static route. A static route allows us to move traffic from one network to another. And to view a static route, as explained in the chapter number 8, you use the command show IP route. And show IP route will return you a route with S. A route with S means static route, and C stands for directly connected routes. So we proceed. So that's all troubleshooting. We won't dwell so much on it. So the last part that I want to go through that I skipped and didn't do at the very beginning was the virtual terminals. How do you set up the virtual terminals? Virtual terminals enable you to remotely access a device over a network. But the key requirements of virtual terminals is you have to have networking set. So we're going to look at how to set virtual terminals for both the routers and the switches. Okay. Now, let's quickly get to it. So I am going to set up these devices for remote access. I want us to be able to telnet into this switch from this network here. I want us to be able to telnet into this switch from this network. I also want us to be able to telnet. So ideally, it's the same way you do everything. It doesn't matter which device, but you should just know how to do it. Okay. So I'm going to set up this switch first for remote access. So as you know, it has to have an IP address. Okay, which we've already done. So simply go to configure terminal. That's global configuration mode. And you say line VTY. So we are going to set up the entire 16 virtual terminals. That is, we specify the command line VTY015 to set up all the virtual terminals, and I set a password. I will set a password called Cisco, and that's all I do. Okay, that virtual terminal is set. Remember, my switch has an IP address. I can see my switch's IP address by simply saying exit and show IP interface brief. And if you see at the very bottom here, under VLAN 1, I have the actual IP address that I gave the switch. So let me test this switch. Remember, it's on this network here. So let me test this switch from another different network over this side. So I open up my PC here, and I simply say telnet followed by the IP address of the switch 192.168.3.4, and it asks me for the line VTY password, which I set as Cisco, and I'm in the switch. So I can say enable, and it won't let me in because I haven't set an enable secret. Okay, so I need now to go back to my 3.4 here, and I set something called an enable secret. Say enable, configure terminal, and I set an enable secret. Remember, for you to be able to switch from user exec to privilege exec remotely, you have to make sure that you've set an enable secret. Cisco. So I've set my enable secret, exit. So I go back to my PC that I've refused, and I say my command prompt, I say enable, asks me for my secret, and I'm in. So that's all for today. I believe I've covered all the chapters. It's very lengthy. It will be a practical one. So I've covered all the aspects that introduce us to a router. And when you get time, please practice on your own. And let's have these concepts on our fingertips, because, of course, we've missed a lot in the time. And that's all for today.